From his early years to his tragic assassination, JFK's story is one of ambition, courage, and enduring legacy. Let's take a deeper look into the fascinating life of the 35th President of the United States. But first, welcome back to Carson Explains. Thank you guys so much for 170 subscribers, we're growing fast. Let's begin. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born on May 29th, 1917 in Brookline, Massachusetts. He was the second of 9 children born to Joseph and Rose Kennedy. Joseph Kennedy Sr. was a successful businessman and investor. He made his fortune through a variety of ventures, including banking, shipbuilding, and Hollywood film production. His savvy investments and businesses earned him a substantial wealth, which he used to further his family's social standing. The Kennedy family also had a summer home in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, which became known as the Kennedy Compound. It was a central location for many family gatherings and political discussions. So as you can see, JFK didn't have it too bad as a child after all. JFK attended prestigious schools including Choate, Rosemary Hall, and Harvard University, where he graduated with a degree in international affairs in 1940. His senior thesis, Why England Slept, was published as a book and became a bestseller. Now that he was done with college, it was time to move on. During World War II, Kennedy joined the U.S. Navy and commanded a patrol torpedo boat in the Pacific Theater, which was a war where the United States and other allies fought against the Japanese in the Pacific. In 1943, Kennedy's boat was struck by a Japanese destroyer, and despite his injuries, Kennedy heroically led his crew to safety. Kennedy's actions in saving the rest of his crew made him a war hero. But back problems stemming from the incident required months of hospitalization at the Chelsea Naval Hospital and plagued him for the rest of his life. Even though he got these lifelong injuries from it, he still had a lot of pride from being in the Navy. He was quoted saying,
"I can imagine no more rewarding a career, and any man who may be asked in this century what he did to make his life worthwhile, I think, can respond with a good deal of pride and satisfaction. I served in the United States Navy."
Now it was time for JFK to get his hand in politics. After the war, Kennedy's political career began to take shape. In 1946, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Massachusetts' 11th District. He served 3 terms before being elected to the U.S. Senate in 1952. Kennedy's political star continued to rise, and in 1960, he announced his candidacy for president.
I am today announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
Kennedy's youth and charisma were assets, but his Catholic faith was initially seen as a potential barrier. He addressed concerns directly in a speech, emphasizing the separation of church and state and his commitment to serving the country above all.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute.
One of the defining moments of Kennedy's campaigns were the televised debates against Richard Nixon. The first debate, held on September 26, 1960, was watched by an estimated 70 million people. Kennedy's calm demeanor and appearance contrasted sharply with Nixon's visibly uncomfortable and sweaty performance. Kennedy's campaign focused on several key issues, including the need to close the missile gap with the Soviet Union, the importance of civil rights, and the promise of the new frontier. Not only that, JFK's campaign also had a secret weapon, and that was his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy. Jackie was fluent in French and Spanish, so she gave interviews and speeches in both languages. This helped win over voters and add an elegant of glamour to the campaign.
Oui, mais vous savez, les obligations sont souvent des plaisirs. Comme aujourd'hui, les étudiants étrangers. Ça m'intéresse beaucoup. J'en étais une.
And there it was, on November 8th, 1960, Kennedy won one of the closest elections in American history, defeating Nixon by a margin of just 0.17% of the popular vote. At the age of 43, he became the youngest elected president. But this is JFK, the guy all the way up the social ladder. He didn't just get inaugurated. To celebrate his victory, Kennedy held a large inaugural ball that featured performances by some of the biggest stars of the time, including Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole. His presidency was then marked by some crucial significant events, the first being the establishment of the Peace Corps. Kennedy established the Peace Corps in 1961, which sent American volunteers to work on development projects in emerging nations.
The Peace Corps gives us a chance to show a side of our country which is too often submerged. Our desire to live in peace, our desire to be of help.
Next was the space race. JFK was a strong advocate for space exploration. In a famous speech at Rice University in 1962, he declared,
"We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard."
And then later on, after he died in 1969, his words would come to fruition when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, if you believe that. But the most critical moment of John F. Kennedy's presidency was the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. This 13-day confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis began when American U-2 spy planes discovered Soviet ballistic missile sites being built in Cuba, just 90 miles from the US coast. These missiles had the potential to deliver nuclear warheads to major American cities within minutes. Faced with this imminent threat, Kennedy convened with a group of his closest advisors. After deliberation, Kennedy decided to implement a naval blockade or quarantine around Cuba to prevent further Soviet shipments of military equipment. On October 22, 1962, Kennedy addressed the nation in a televised speech, informing the American public about the presence of the Soviet missiles in Cuba and announcing the naval blockade. He demanded the removal of the missiles and warned that any missile launched from Cuba would be considered an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, triggering a full retaliatory response. Kennedy's calm demeanor during his televised address reassured the American public and demonstrated his commitment to resolving the crisis peacefully if it was possible. Over the next few days, the world watched anxiously as Soviet ships approached the quarantine line. Kennedy maintained open channels of communication with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, aiming to find a peaceful resolution. The crisis reached its peak on October 27th when an American U-2 plane was shot down over Cuba, and both sides prepared for potential military action. However, through back-channel communications and diplomatic efforts, Kennedy and Khrushchev reached an agreement. A crucial part of the negotiation was a secret agreement in which the US agreed to remove its missiles out of Turkey in exchange for the Soviet Union to remove their missiles from Cuba. On October 28, 1962, the Soviet Union announced that it would dismantle its missile sites in Cuba in exchange for a US pledge to not invade the island. The Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved and the immediate threat of nuclear war was averted. Not only that, JFK's domestic policies focused on economic growth, education, and civil rights. He proposed significant tax cuts to stimulate the economy and supported federal aid for education. Kennedy didn't only just have his debates televised, he was also the first president to have all of his live conferences on TV. This made his administration more accessible to the public. But just like I talked about Abraham Lincoln in my last video, tragically John F. Kennedy's presidency was cut short on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. On that fateful day, Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline were riding in a motorcade through Dealey Plaza. The motorcade route was published in local newspapers, allowing thousands of Dallas residents to line the streets and catch a glimpse of the president and the first lady. The excitement and cheers of the crowd quickly turned to horrors as shots rang out, fatally wounding the president. He was pronounced dead later that day at Parkland Memorial Hospital. The official investigation concluded that the assassination was carried out by Lee Harvey Oswald, a self-proclaimed communist, who fired 3 shots from the 6th floor window at the Texas School Book Depository. Oswald was arrested later that day but was killed 2 days later by nightclub owner Jack Ruby while being transferred from the city jail. Lee Harvey Oswald never stood trial for the assassination of JFK. His death at the hands of Jack Ruby sparked numerous conspiracy theories about the true circumstances and motives behind the assassination. Some believe that the larger conspiracy involving multiple parties, including the Mafia, the CIA, or anti-Castro Cuban exiles, but I guess we'll never know. Let me know what you think really happened down below. John F. Kennedy's life was a blend of ambition, service, and vision. His charismatic leadership and dedication to the principles of freedom and equality continue to resonate. I think it's such a shame that Kennedy wasn't able to make it all the way through his presidency. I think he would have done a lot of great things. But that's all I have for Kennedy. Let me know who you want to see next. I'll see you guys on Saturday. Bye.